Okay, I think I put Telecaster just because it's a simpler comparison. Although really, I'll probably be talking more about the Stratocaster than the Telecaster, and I won't be. Uh, I'm just saying Les Paul is kind of the default Gibson, although the SG might be a model you're more familiar with or more comparable in this way than that way. I'm not going to get into all that. Again, the Marty McFly meme about, could he really get that 70s lead tone out of that hollow body, with a clean channel amp or whatever? No, that kind I like to keep bringing that up, even though I think I already did that. This was some notes I wanted to bring up. Not all of this was fresh in my head. One thing I wanted to say is, I'm not really crazy about, people trying to make Fenders more like Gibsons per se. But in a previous video, I was talking about bridge and neck humbuckers for Teles and Strats and the placement thereof. Like they usually end up in the bridge, or I'm sorry, in the bridge instead of the neck. And I don't know if that's always the best option. I'm going to explore that conversation a little bit more with Stratocasters in another video, so I'm not going to really go into it here. But in a previous Telecaster video, I had said something about like the metal plate is irrelevant. What is, this basically, which used to be the tray, and a lot of guys don't like the tray because they hit their hands on it. Apparently this connects to your ground wire though, so it's not completely irrelevant. So nobody commented on the video and called me out on that. But again, if you're building your own guitars or repairing guitars or something, you should do your due diligence and know the specs of the guitar and stuff, and not just listen to one YouTube video and say, oh, I don't need the metal thing, and just chuck it because it might have a function that, beyond what I covered. But Telecasters have a single coil pickup, for those of you who don't know, but you can get Telecasters that have a humbucking pickup back here. And like I had said in the previous video, that makes less sense than having the humbucking pickup up here, because this is where you get your classic Telecaster sound. A Gibson, on the other hand, instead of two single coils or a single and a humbucker, will typically have two humbucking pickups, so they have a totally different sound and they don't feed back as much or whatever. So when I said, the metal plate grounded for single coil is maybe more necessary, then I stated that it does nothing in the video. What I meant was that it does nothing to affect the tone, not the function of the guitar. So that's the distinction I'm trying to make here, even though if you just saw that video, you might not be seeing this video. Who cares, whatever. Because I was rushing toward the end to get that video out. So, yeah. Okay, so also, this is not the same as a Stratocaster pickup. And if you're a Gibson fan and you're watching this video, you couldn't care less. You're waiting for me to get to the Gibson part. Okay. But someone had written Juggernaut. I guess we have to remember the Tele was designed with that metal pickup cover. The ashtray is basically designed to hold up a piece of metal that doesn't even ship with the guitar any longer. But in another part of the comment or whatever, he said that the metal was for grounding. So I was reacting to that. Okay, but comparing, and then there was Esquire versus Tele with Strat pickup. I don't know what that was referring to. Okay. Anyway, the reason I was going to do a Telecaster or a Fender, actually, a Fender to Gibson comparison would be a better title or a better topic, whatever. And both are known for being pretty heavy guitars. Stratocasters aren't really that much lighter than Telecasters necessarily. They have a little bit more of the body typically shaved off. Some Telecasters will be contoured back here. Most are not. Most of them are a slab. And the Les Paul is a slab, and the SG, like I said, if you want to compare the Strat and the SG, it's not a great comparison, but that's where they contoured the body a little bit more because they thought they were going to replace the Les Paul entirely with this new streamlined version. Whereas the Telecaster and the Stratocaster, I don't think they were trying to eliminate the Telecaster with the Stratocaster. So that's why it's not a completely analogous comparison. And then you can compare, the Jazz Masters and da da da. Again, I'm not trying to do every single guitar, every single model. But this is kind of a reaction video to another video that came out this week. I had done a reaction to one of their previous videos, and I've tried to record it like 3 times, and the program keeps eating it. So when I finally record that for a 4th time, maybe maybe next week I'll get around to it. I don't know. But this topic is more current, so I'm jumping into this one. And so let's see, the semi-hollow instead of Les Paul because of the weight. Yes, when I bought my semi-hollow in the previous video, the Epiphone Dot, it's because I was already getting a heavy, not this one, a heavier one actually, pretty heavy Telecaster. So I didn't necessarily want a ton of heavy guitars, and I wanted something that looked like I said, Tom Petty or John Fogerty or whatever. So I was kind of going for different body shapes, and I was in a real anti-Strat mood at the time for whatever reason. So let's see. So yes, and I wanted the Telecaster because it reminded me of Bruce Springsteen. Although I guess if I would, and somebody else had said that they wanted a Telecaster because of Bruce Springsteen in the comments, so that jogged my memory. And so this version though is different than the Springsteen version. I think he is a Nashville that actually has a 3rd pickup in here. I'm not sure if it's the same as a Jaguar single coil pickup or not. And I don't know. I guess, if I really wanted a Bruce Springsteen guitar, I would need to know just what vintage year his was. But I also don't know, did he buy it for those pickups in that neck? Or was it just whatever was available at the time? By then he was pretty established, so he could afford to be more selective. But I don't know. Maybe he was just playing the same beat up one he had since 1968. Just because. I don't know. If Bruce Springsteen loves guitars and buys tons of guitars like Metallica or whoever. So anyway, in their video, they had talked about, though, that the ultimate iconic rock look from their era or their mindset or whatever it was, the Les Paul with the Marshall stack. And for me, I was saying that actually when I grew up, I was almost complete, and Jimmy Page, who gave way to Slash, I guess. And Slash came after a long period of guys not playing Les Pauls and kind of reinvigorated the market, I guess. When I grew up, I was completely oblivious to Jimmy Page, and most of my heroes were playing, Fender Strats or Telecasters, especially when I, really started noticing the actual guitars in music videos instead of just listening to the radio or casually seeing live performance, TV broadcasts and things. The Les Paul was not at the top of my list. A couple years later, I started noticing the hollow bodies a bit more, even though I thought they must be super expensive or very fragile compared to, what the surf guys had or the metal guys were shredding, all solid bodies. I finally got the Epiphone. I was tempted to get an SG for a while, but I decided that it was nowhere near the perfect guitar for me when I finally got to check one out at Guitar Center. Even though a couple of super famous guys have, played those examples in the comments or whatever. Yeah, I was not a big Led Zeppelin fan in my youth. All of My Love was about the only song I could say I knew for sure, which is, mostly a John Paul Jones keyboard thing more than a guitar, song. And then junior year in high school, one of the guys in my ROP class, he bought the Zeppelin 4 album, and I borrowed it and taped it. And I had other friends who knew some of the other Zeppelin songs, like Communication Breakdown, and they would recognize it. And I would, oh, really? But I didn't collect their records much at first. I had like In Through the Outdoor on vinyl, and maybe Led Zeppelin 2 that I think I found at the swap meet. And then I finally got Houses of the Holy a couple of years later. I got that new on vinyl at Tower because, Dire Maker or Dia Maker, how you would pronounce it. And I think I got Led Zeppelin 1 around the same time, and then ended up getting Led Zeppelin 3 also at Tower. That's how dating myself. And I know I found Physical Graffiti used somewhere a little later, and then finally got them on CD, like after college or something. I mean, like I was a pretty slow Led Zeppelin collector guy. As far as Les Pauls, yes, Brian May, Jimmy Page, Slash, and then they were saying they all, played other models and brands at first before a lot of them became Les Paul icons. Jimmy Page for sure being the Les Paul icon. But okay, so what I was saying was, or going to say, I guess, if you're going from a Les Paul with the humbucker sound, and especially the flat neck, this isn't even a bad. This is a very modern neck. This is not a true baseball bat Telecaster neck. I mean, if you go from a Les Paul neck, which is maybe a little bit skinnier and flatter than this, to a real big round, of course you might think, oh my God, why would anybody want to do this to themselves? And if you get a Stratocaster with a bigger neck and those wimpy pickups compared to the humbucking pickups, of course it's not going to have the same crunch, this is going to seem like the anti-guitar to a Gibson devotee. I understand that. The Telecaster, like I said, might be a slightly better or worse transition because there's less tones or to get confused about. There's only a 3-switch thing instead of 5. I don't know. As a hobbyist, I have a list. I'll write it up maybe in the comments. I've played like 25 different types of guitars or 25 different guitars roughly. And it's still nowhere near probably all the Fender neck options, whereas Gibson basically just has one, right? And so, I had said that and somebody commented back, and I'll get to that in a minute. I think Fender intentionally can, change their neck construction to save time manufacturing. I don't know how much money that saved them and how much the consumer then saved, but different necks have different advantages. And, I don't think that it's just cheap laziness that they made this decision, although a lot of people point to that and say, oh, look, they're just cutting costs. They're gypping the customer, whatever. And then I had said in the comments that I thought Kurt Cobain, actually, he said Slash was like his ultimate cool guy when he was first getting into the guitar. And I thought Kurt Cobain at the time looked cooler than Slash. So I guess that means why I still like Jaguars more by default. If I'm going by the 90s instead of like the 60s and 70s, which was more influential to me musically overall. But I never was interested in the Jag-Stang or the Mustang. I bought, back several years ago, I bought 3 guitars, then like 5 if you want to count like my jazz bass and like I said, the P bass that I sold to get the jazz bass and all that kind of thing. And I had upgraded from an Affinity Strat to a standard Strat, so the necks were slightly different on those, and that was an adjustment. Then the neck on the Telecaster was the Mexican Telecaster, so the neck was an adjustment on that kind of thing. And so then when I, finally felt the Gibsons and the Epiphone, oh yes, of course, the neck is, like I said, that smoother, thinner, feeling to it. Does BB King play Gibson? I talked about the Sheraton and the Epiphone in the previous video, and whether or not Ibanez would be a good substitute for a Gibson. Don't know. It's kind of a lateral move in that price range. I'm not going to revisit that. If you want to see my Epiphone hollow body video, I just put that out. I talked about that in there. I don't know if it's easier to pick out Gibson custom options or just hunt for vintage models. I mean, I'm sure they're both pretty pricey, and however you want to navigate that. I'll probably talk about that in another video when I talk more about guitar modifications and custom guitars. That's scheduled for eventually. Then let's see. Then they started talking about acoustic guitars. I don't need to comment much on acoustic guitars. Yeah, that'll be a separate video. These guys would I joked. I said he said they never get tired of seeing Gibsons, and I said, but they don't have tortoise shell pick guards, which is of course a major selling feature for a Fender customer. Okay, so then I had said in the comments about the Fender having the next selections, and this is where the guy commented, user Q whatever. Yeah, sort of like saying Honda has 18 color choices while a Lamborghini has 4. And then I had to reply, well, no, that's actually a bad analogy because the color doesn't affect the performance of the motor or the chassis or the comfort of the seats, etc. You can get a flame top Fender for $600 or an Ibanez even, and it won't make it sound any better. It'll look more like a Gibson, but it won't be whatever a Gibson is supposed to be. So I hadn't heard back yet. I thought for sure I was going to get some snarky remark to my, criticism. And he didn't. But of course, I came up with a rebuttal anyway, which is the reason I'm making this endless video, because I have to read my rebuttal, which hopefully I'll be able to post this. So sport cards are not big clunky chunks of wood. Maybe the hollow body is more like the Cadillac, or maybe the Gibson is the Cadillac, but the Fender is the Corvette. They can both still be luxury cars. Fenders aren't necessarily cheap. Like I said, so if B.B. King, Lucille is the Cadillac for sure. And the Telly is the 52 Ford truck with the wooden, bed. Like in that scene in Love and Mercy when Brian Wilson goes to the Cadillac dealer, and I'm sitting there scratching my head going, you're a blues man from Chicago now? When did that happen? Cadillac. Yeah, well, anyway. So I'm not sure where this exactly puts the Les Paul, but Slash doesn't play super fast music anyway. So the hot rodding narrative kind of disintegrates compared to faster music. Like Guns N' Roses to me is more like the Rolling Stones or Aerosmith, whereas I'm pretty sure like Iron Maiden and Metallica don't use Les Pauls much, like I said earlier. I hadn't seen any performances as such, and if Stratocasters are super slow instruments, Yngwie wouldn't play one, or Eddie Van Halen wouldn't have had his. So that argument doesn't completely hold up. The most iconic guitar moment ever, for all you Fender haters out there, is still Jimi Hendrix at Woodstock with a Stratocaster, not Slash posting for a video in his silly hat and his boots. I never heard any complaints for or about Stevie Ray Vaughan or Clapton or and George Harrison. They both had psychedelic strats on Get Back and Strange Brew, and don't forget Dick Dale and the Beach Boys and blah blah blah. Les Pauls are known for their sustain. That's like, people joke about this in videos. But does anyone really need all that sustain? I played a Les Paul for a couple hours once at a friend's house, and I did enjoy it, but I did not buy it because, again, I already had another heavy guitar and didn't feel the need to spend that much money on it. But literally, Dave Gilmour plays Tellys and Strats, not Les Pauls. I was going to make a joke out of that, but instead, does he play the Telly or the Les Paul? Sorry. This is from Wikipedia. In early 2019, Gilmour announced he would auction many of his guitars for charity, including the Black Strat from 1970 and the 0001 Strat. On June 2019, the black one, I assume, became the most expensive guitar ever sold at the time, and until Kurt Cobain's Martin went on auction and beat it, which nobody's ever going to play that. They're going to hang it on the wall. So Mr. Sustain himself plays a Stratocaster, not a Gibson. So I guess that's all I have to say about that.